Eagles!
Oh, yeah, it's the Matt Kwasiborski Show calling you live and direct from our nation's capital in Washington, D.C. on kind of a foggy, drizzly, yet warm January night. Can't really complain about the weather the last couple of days. But here we are talking with the great Jonathan Mathers up in New Jersey. How you doing, John?
Oh, I'm doing well, Matt. Thanks for having me as always.
Great to have you back. I looked the last time we did a podcast was November 30th, so just after Thanksgiving. So it's been a little while. Hope you're doing well, you and the fam, and all your friends up there in New Jersey.
Everything's good. Can't complain. When the Eagles are in the playoffs, it's always a good day.
Yes, and that's definitely, obviously, the part of our topic there is going to be the Eagles-Giants. Before we get started, I'd like to thank Al Gore for inventing the internet, Spreaker platform to have the podcast, and all the loyal listeners out there that have listened in the last couple of months. John, we're sitting in Brigantine in, I want to say, August, September of this year. Yeah, it was September. It was opening day. And I said, John, we're going to do a podcast on the 19th of January. The Eagles were going to be 14-3. They were going to clinch the number one seed, home field advantage, because remember the last 2 years the NFL has changed the seeding to where only the number one seed gets it. Have to play 2 games to get to the Super Bowl. How much money were you putting down back then in September on opening day if that was going to be the outcome of the season?
Was it your money or my money?
Obviously, it was your money.
I wasn't going to be putting that much down, that's for sure. One thing I don't do is bet on the Eagles, but I would have never – I thought that they were going to be a decent team. Like, I thought this season was all about seeing what Jalen Hurts could be. And, another year, Nick Sirianni's second year. I had no inkling really that they would be this good.
Yeah.
The schedule also sort of predicated that they were going to be okay.
Yep.
Based upon the teams we were going against. But I would have never bet in 1,000 years that I would actually thought that maybe you were drunk or something or super something. I don't know, out of your mind if you told me all that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about this before. Like, this year was supposed to be, can Jalen Hurts, second year in offense, take that next level? He absolutely did. Not only take the next level, he vaunted himself into the MVP conversation. And the team just got on a crazy roll. We were like 8-0, 9-0 going down the stretch. But I think the question that I do want to ask is, like, I think both of us, I think you will agree that we knew the Eagles were going to contend for the division. They made a significant upgrades to a lot of weaknesses. Your boy Howie Roseman, early on the podcast, within the first 3 minutes, signs Reddick, signs Kazir White, signs Bradbury, trades for Gardner Johnson, and obviously trades for A.J. Brown. Really updated this roster to whereas I felt the NFC had an exodus of talent that all went to the AFC, and the Eagles were willing to make a lot of significant improvements. That's why I thought they could compete for the division with Dallas. But I never realized or imagined that they would be 14-3 or be at 8-0 at one point. But I want to throw the question back to you. When did you realize in the season that, we got something a little special going on here, not just contending for the division, but for the number one spot in the NFC?
Well, one thing I do want to say before I answer that question is this is the main reason I love the Matt Kwasiborski podcast is that within 3 minutes a Howie Roseman comment comes up. I love it. Anyway. Probably for me, it was probably later in the season because I'm pretty skeptical, as you know. I'm superstitious. We just sort of talked about that offline. And even at this very moment, I get very skeptical and superstitious about it. But probably for me, it was probably week 12 or 13, right? Okay. Week 12 or 13, you play Green Bay. Mm-hmm. You beat them 40-33, right? Yeah. And at that point, like, everyone still thinks Green Bay is a good team. Aaron Rodgers, Hall of Famer, Super Bowl winner, right? Always on the cusp of being a contender, right?
Yep.
And even with Tennessee, you go in there basically, go back to that. You go to Green Bay comes here, you whoop on them, you score 40 points. You do give up 33, which is, I'm sure we'll talk about the defense later. Mm-hmm. But then Tennessee, you whoop up on Tennessee pretty bad as well, 35-10. Yeah. And I'm like, those two teams in the past 3 years have always been pretty up and coming.
Yep.
You could argue either way, playoffs, Aaron Rodgers, Derrick Henry, Vrabel as a coach, talented team. So I think between those 2 weeks after week 10 and week 12 and 13, I was kind of like, okay, we're for all intents and purposes manhandling teams, right?
Yeah.
So now it's kind of like I can get past we beat up on the Cowboys with a backup quarterback. We beat up on Washington, right? So like you kind of get past that and you're like, all right, I want to play really good teams who I think are good and whoop up on them. And then I feel good about myself.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it's good points. Green Bay, that was the last loss that Green Bay had suffered was the Eagles until they crapped the bed against Detroit the last night. And then Tennessee, that was way surprising, that 35-10 drubbing of them coming in. For me, it was a little early on, and it was based upon the schedule, right? They open up against Detroit. That was a nail-biter game. I think we kind of predicted that, not in the way we thought. And then Minnesota comes in, and we just manhandled Minnesota. Minnesota didn't even want to be on the field. Kirk Cousins, once we took Justin Jefferson out of the game, and the Giants did that this past week in the wild card, it was over. But it was more the next game against Washington. We didn't really unleash the pass rush. We had Carson Wentz went into Washington. Wentz looked pretty good for the first 2 games there against Jacksonville and Detroit himself. And we sacked him like 9 times. We unleashed the pass rush because that was the criticism. And then, but week 4, we played Dallas. Week 4, week 5, Sunday night. Get out to a big lead at 20-3. Dallas comes back 20-17, and then the fourth quarter is I think it was the fourth quarter, went on a massive drive where Jalen led the offense, and it wasn't like bang, 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 score, touchdown. It was a drive that showed a lot of character. Dallas had played a very good game, and they actually won the stats battle in that game in terms of total yardage. First downs. They just had 10 penalties to our none, and we sacked them 7 times, but they sacked us 4 times. And that was the drive where Kelsey says to the Dallas defensive line, it's coming. And it's the 4th and 1 sneak, and they get Jalen over there. And that was sort of like, that's how a team defines their character, right, on the drives like that. Because the rest of the schedule do get a little easier. Of course, they had a little hiccup against the Commanders, who played almost a perfect game to beat us on that Monday night. The Colts, that was kind of a weird game in itself, but we adjusted well there. But to me, I was like, I don't see many teams really getting in the way outside of health concerns, but that's where it rises up, right? We had some health concerns coming down the stretch, and I concerned a little bit about the inexperience of the coaching staff. But before we get into that, the question I want to ask you is, we beat the Giants 48-22, pretty much the last complete game the Eagles have played. Do you think that has any effect on Sunday's game?
I think it does. Does, because I think from 2 sides of it, right? The psyche of the team, the Eagles, beating up on them 48-22, right? Yep. You're like, all right, we beat them handedly that first game, and that game was a bloodbath. Like, that game was over by halftime. Yeah, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
So that. But the thing about that game was it was so much earlier in the season, right? Then you play them again, December, and yes, for all intents and purposes, we played vanilla. Yeah, but our starters had to play. Their starters were pulled out, and it wasn't like a blowout. It wasn't like we took care of business by halftime, and we were all out of the stadiums. It didn't work out that way. So. For the Giants' purposes, they're like, okay, well, we may have lost that game, but we kind of won something, right? Yeah. And now we get to go against you again. Yeah. So the odds are, I don't know what the odds are specifically, but I know to beat, a team 3 times in a season, 3 times is very difficult. Yeah. So you can't really take that away. You can't get complacent. And the past is a past, right? But you still have to learn from it. There are probably things that the Giants learned in the first game that they're going to take, that they probably took into the last game, and that combined body of work, whether, again, that last game was vanilla, but that first game, was a whooping. They're both going to be able to take things from that. So I definitely think it's going to have an effect. Mm-hmm. I mean, everyone's going to be juiced. The fact that you're hearing now that, like, again, it's a close game in proximity, so Giants fans are going to be coming down, right? You're going to have that atmosphere in the link. Like, so I think all that stuff sort of attributes to how that game is going to be being played, really,
Yeah, it's a good point. disagree a little bit. The Giants are getting back their starting quarterbacks who were out of that game, the 48-22, and they're also getting back their stud defensive lineman Leonard Williams, who did not play that game. On the flip side, the Eagles are getting Dallas Goedert back, and I think if you watch the way C.J. Hawkinson kind of lit up the Giants defense, I think there's some hope there. So I think that plays a little bit of a role. That last game, we all wanted to see Jalen Hurts out of there by halftime. It's like, all right, let's get this. But they were holding us to field goals, and Jalen had to throw the ball 37 times, and it was really like, how much can he handle that? Didn't really run. If he ran, he slid within 1 yard. I throw that game out of the window a little bit more than I do the 48-22. I just think the Giants getting these guys back on defense is going to play a huge role, and you saw how they were able to take out Justin Jefferson from the game plan of the Vikings.
Sure.
With that, that's they're probably pretty much might play the same role with A.J. Brown or Devonta Smith over the other end. Now, Justin Jefferson to Adam Thielen, who's on his way down. Great career in Minnesota Vikings, good fantasy player, a couple of years, 3-4 years in a row. But he's clearly not what he was, and the Eagles have, what is he, a shorty Batman or slim Batman?
Skinny Batman.
Skinny Batman, Devonta Smith, who's exceeded my expectations this year. So I want to give a little shout out to him there. But it is very hard to beat the team 3 times in a row. You're absolutely right. Dallas, I think it's only been done 17 times since 1950. Granted, schedules have changed. The games that you play in the season have changed, things like that. But it's only been done in the last time the Dallas Cowboys beat the Eagles 3 times in 2009. So that is a huge, huge issue going into this game.
That's a good stat right there. 17 times since 1950. That's good.
I was Googling it while you were talking, my man.
I love it. Great stat.
I think coming into this game, for me, the strengths that the Eagles have are depth. I really, like I talked about in the beginning of the podcast, really just how much depth the Eagles have. You sub out one of the receivers. You got Quez Watkins, who can step up a little bit, although he struggled a little bit down the stretch. He's still a reliable guy compared to what the Giants have. Our defensive line is stacked. Again, thanks to your guy for Howie Roseman for signing Sue and Linval Joseph, the ex-Giant, during the season.
No, don't forget Robert Quinn.
We're stretching a little bit now, John.
I know.
But he did make moves to shore up that defensive line and the run defense. And offensive line-wise, we do have some solid studs, although there's some current concerns on there. But I think I think you may agree, it's all going to come down to the health of 2 players. And who are those 2 players?
Well, I have Jalen Hurts and Lane Johnson.
Exactly.
I mean, that was my second. That was my second bullet point to talk about. I mean, those are. I mean, first and foremost, to put them ranked order, obviously Hurts number 1, right?
Yep.
But Lane Johnson not far behind. However, I mean, in the last game, I don't want to say that Lane Johnson's absence was super felt. I think it was more felt during the 2 other games with Minshew.
Yep.
But it sounds like he's ready to go. It sounds like it's not as serious as previously reported. He's the only guy that knows his body, so I mean, I trust him. I mean, he's a Super Bowl champion. But again, the rust is the rust. The question that I have is the rust factor of Jalen Hurts. Is that going to be a factor? Meaning, he was, for all intents and purposes, 70 to 80% healthy again the last game of the season, right? He was able to throw the ball far, but he was sore. Everyone talked about even the coach mentioned he was sore.
Yeah.
We saw practice of him the following week during the wild card weekend. He was throwing a towel, just swinging a towel. He wasn't even throwing a football.
Yeah.
So does that have any sort of rust effect on him? And if he had already played the last 3 games of the season or the last game he didn't play, I would have felt a lot better. But it's going to be a question mark whether he feels the need to. He's going to play his game.
Yeah,
but
he has
to.
He has to.
He has to.
For the
but
Eagles
is he
to have
going
a chance.
to be a little bit more hesitant? And I don't think he should be, because I don't think that's the type of person he is. But that'll be one thing to certainly watch throughout the game.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely agree. He didn't have that same swagger against the Giants in that last game when he walked. The left shoulder had the swagger, but the right one was a little like, trying to get to that swagger. Didn't quite match up there, so you could tell that he was hurting in that game. And the fact that he had to throw the ball 37 times, I think that was more of a coaching decision. Let's stretch it out, see how he recovers, because we may need him to throw it, 37 to 40 times in a playoff game. Hopefully not, because that means they're kind of coming from behind. But anyway, long story short, yeah, that's a huge factor. Lane Johnson's, you're talking about, remember, Super Bowl champion. This guy has not given up a sack in the last, 29 games, which is NFL record. Mm-hmm. The Eagles' record without him is now, I think, 13-22 over his career. And the record with him is just the other way, opposite, crazy numbers that way, like 77 and 29-1. How going into knowing that he may not play, I had a strategy, but I wanted to hear if you had a different strategy than just having Jack Driscoll being at the right tackle, who was no slouch, but definitely struggled coming in off the bench cold.
I guess you could flip and put Mailata as the right tackle.
Exactly.
I mean, and then do you put Dillard in at left?
Yes.
Okay. So that's another option. I mean, that's why depth is always important, right? You talked about it earlier. Having a deep, everyone says like, oh, you should. I have a friend who's like, oh, you should have traded Andre Dillard, after the preseason. It's like, well, yeah, I get why you'd think that, but that depth, especially on the offensive line, is super important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely would have started Mailata in practice at right tackle of the week on the bye week, see if he could handle it, then have Andre Dillard. And if not, then you have to go back to Driscoll. You get him coached up, get him warmed up. Sometimes it's hard, I think, in any sport just to come off the bench cold and just go into a thrusting position. I mean, that's tough on any level of any sport there. But I have confidence that if Driscoll has to be ready to play, he'll do a lot better. I think he's learned from it, but I would have started with the Mailata, Dillard, and let's see how because Mailata may not adjust as well. There are certain times in Lane's career where we threw him to left tackle when Justin Peters, and he didn't fare very well over there. It was not a good thing. But the health of those two guys. How big of a loss do you think Avonte Maddox is going to be looking at the Giants, the way they played almost a perfect offensive game against Minnesota?
Funny you mentioned that. My first bullet point about their current weaknesses is Darius Slay and the nickel position.
Oh, Darius Slay.
But today, seeing that Avonte Maddox is back at practice, does that tell you something? I don't know. He was back. He didn't have he was stretching and doing those drills. So I don't know if he was a full participant. I'd have to look at the sheet or whatever. But since there was a stat that I think Ruben Frank put out about Darius Slay, I think it was Slay since I don't know, week 10, 12 or something. Mm-hmm. He was like one of the worst corners in the league.
Yeah.
And if you remember the beginning of the season, he was playing really well, right? A couple interceptions here and there, so on and so forth. So the one thing that I think from a Giants perspective that goes underlooked is that, Kenny Golladay didn't turn out to be the Kenny Golladay from the Detroit Lions. But between Slayton, him, that Hodges kid,
from Buffalo.
they generally have pretty good. They generally draft good wide receivers if you remember from the past, right? Yeah. So you just have to wonder that make sure James Bradbury's got his head on straight, right? It's a big game for him as always. That's the team that cut him. Darius Slay, what Darius Slay are we going to get? Are we going to get week 1 through 7 of him, or are we going to get week 10 through whatever?
Right.
And then exactly your point about Avonte Maddox, because I feel like since he's been down, since that Dallas game, that position has been a little bit been shredded a bit.
Yep.
However, I will say when Gardner Johnson came back, he was. I think you saw a little bit more impact. They pulled him down, had him play nickel a little bit. So, and he's done that before when he played with New Orleans. So, I'm optimistic. I just that's a concern of me right now.
Agreed. Yeah, that was a weird way they lost him, and they never really diagnosed his injury outside of the toe injury. It was like the old hockey upper body injury. Well, what is it? Well, it's an upper body injury. Well, but when you saw him in Dallas walking off the field without his sock on, in his toe. I was like, ugh, that's not good. But that is a huge loss. It's probably the best slot cornerback we've had in a long time, maybe since back in the day with Al Harris, who went on had a great career with Green Bay as well. Yeah, the health is.
Who also, by the way, is coaching. Isn't he coaching?
Yes.
Is he Dallas?
I think Dallas. Yeah, I think he's
Dallas.
Okay, yeah, cornerbacks coach. Good call, man. Good call.
I love to see that.
Good call. Looking at, I do have another concern. The health is the main concern when your franchise quarterback has a dinged up throwing shoulder, your all world right tackle. You don't know what you're going to get of him. Do you have any coaching concerns going into this? Because I kind of do.
Dude, are you looking at my screen?
I see the Jeremiah Axe, the Bednarik signed jersey up there, which I don't think I've seen before, but that's awesome.
Jonathan Gannon defensively is my biggest coaching concern. Absolutely.
Why is
Absolutely.
that?
Because here's my thing, and I'm gonna harp on this until Jonathan Gannon either does something great here or leaves here. Okay? When you give up a 3rd and 30, it's like I get like the ghost of Jim Schwartz in my head. Okay? You can give up a 3rd and 30 and lose a game in the regular season, and it's not terrible. Okay. But if you're going to do that same sort of thing in the playoffs, that type of game, that type of play can end a game, which it did during the 3rd and 30 of T.Y. Hilton, right?
Yes, but it was that on Gannon, though.
Absolutely.
Really? He was the one that didn't make the play. He's not out there playing.
Because when you go back and look at the tape, they aren't playing you would know better than me because you coach defensive backs. They're not playing back at the sticks. They were playing up with like safety help. Why not just pull like the Jim Schwartz sticks defense and play your corners and your safeties at the sticks? Because at that point, when that ball's let go, that ball was let go way earlier because it was a 3rd and 30. I think they needed the first down. I'm trying to think. They got 45 out of the play? Like he threw it way past the sticks.
Yeah.
So you could have adjusted. I mean, Slay was burned on that play. He didn't get the over top help, but he was also up on him. Like if you have a 3rd and 30, I'm keeping you. Like that's the one time where I'm like, okay, play off my receiver. Give my receiver 10 yards.
Right.
Because I can make the play if I keep him in front. You know, Jim Schwartz, keep everything in front of you. Keep everything in front of you. So he's my biggest concern. I don't have any concerns offensively, as long as they run the football, as long equal amounts of running the football and throwing the football, and that includes Jalen Hurts running the football too, because he's part of the reason why he's not part. He's one of the main reasons why we're in the position we are. The use of his legs, the way that he can get out of trouble or see something and roll and get 5 yards, 3 yards, as opposed to taking a sack or throwing the ball away, or in the Carson Wentz era, throwing it to the other team or fumbling. Like, let him do that. So that's all I got to say about that.
Eagles finished second in defense, total yards per game, 301. Points per game, total yards. They were number 3 behind Buffalo, San Francisco. Yards per game, passing yards per game, number 1 on average. Rushing yards per game, a little bit lower, kind of middle of the pack there. Points per game, 20.2. And they averaged 4.8 yards per play to the offense, number 1 in the league. They have statistically the number 1 defense in the NFL coming into the playoffs, even as great as San Francisco was, but in terms of yards per play and passing yards.
You feel good about Jonathan Gannon? Even knowing those stats?
Yes. I'll tell you why. I looked at my coaching concerns go back to the Chicago game, which I was not able to watch because I was in flight. Chicago game is when Jalen got hurt. Chicago, it was like, -9 degrees or something that day with the wind chill, and they decided to throw the ball the entire game. Why is that? The game after that was Dallas and New Orleans and going to that Giants game. The Dallas game, that was a Gannon issue there. He didn't adjust fast enough. And you also have Minshew but it was a turnover thing. I don't blame Gannon or Minshew. It was more blame Quez Watkins. The New Orleans game, remember, Andy Dalton started out 14 for 14, looked like the MVP. Gannon issue, Gannon adjusted. I don't know with this team in an overall coaching way, are they able to get this team ready to understand that every down counts? That every down counts. Dallas and New Orleans are playing for their playoff lives. Dallas still had a shot at the number 1 seed. Played every down like that was their best. New Orleans was still alive. And what did New Orleans do? They went on a long drive in the beginning and scored a touchdown. Andy Dalton, Taysom Hill. Like, it was the exact same thing that New Orleans did the week before in a cold Cleveland and beat Cleveland. And it was the exact same game plan. Gannon did adjust. He gets out of that zone. And once he gets out of that zone, it was much better. We didn't have Maddox there. We didn't have C.J. Gardner. Yes, it was the Saints, but the Saints struggled when Dalton threw that pick. I think Gannon adjusts a little bit more. But overall for the season, I go with Shane Steichen. I thought he called a masterful offensive game plan for the majority of the season, except the Chicago game. New Orleans was just one of those, like, it was Vegas in on this. Gardner Minshew looked like he never played quarterback before that game. I mean, that was a really weird game. Mm-hmm. But it goes to our friend Les Bowen, who said when Nick Sirianni was hired, he has no experienced NFL coaches from the coordinator position, i.e. how Brian Dable, never been a head coach, poaches Wink Martindale, right? Peterson brings in Jim Schwartz, still gets guys with those experiences. And I just felt that the Eagles' intensity didn't match the team's intensity and their desire to win. I mean, in the Dallas game, we turned it over 4 times, and 2 were on Quez Watkins. One was a mishandoff between Boston Scott. Sanders fumbles the football. In the New Orleans game, they just were not ready to play. The New York Giants game, we should have been, our starters should have been at halftime, should have been resting, and they weren't. Like, we could not match Davis Webb with our starters. I understand that we didn't want to put anyone in harm's way and take a big hit. But that, and the Eagles were woefully unprepared for Tampa Bay in the playoffs last year. So, yeah, I think I do have an overall coaching, some nervousness. We're from Philadelphia. We're always going to be nervous, even at 14-3, number 1 overall seed. That's what I have to say about the coaching part.
Yeah, I mean, I don't get this. I mean, I don't know. When you look at our team's record at 14-3, first round bye of the playoffs, and yes, I mean, would have been great if they had an easy street from week 15 on, based on their record. Yeah. That would have been the ideal thing. But then we would have been sitting here talking about the rust and they didn't play the last 2 games. Are they going to be good? Everyone's healthy, but they haven't played in 4 weeks. So we would be saying that. But my point about that is talking about when your coaching staff works together with the players on the field and creates a team that's 14-3. I mean, you can't take away from what they've done. Like, they've been pretty prepared. Yeah, you can point out specific things, 3rd and 30s, or going for certain 4th down plays in close games. You can nitpick that, but I don't think that, I don't think looking back, Nick Sirianni, the week of the Saints game is like, guys, we got to finish this the fuck out, and enough's enough, and get hyped, and then we'll take the rest of the weeks off. These guys are professionals. They know the job at hand, and I think part of the rah-rah stuff that maybe you're not feeling from him, I think, as you get more in the locker room, you think about the people that are in the locker room, the Brandon Grahams, the Fletcher Coxes.
You're going right straight to my point.
Those are the guys that are the leaders in that team, along with Jalen Hurts, obviously.
Case, Kelsey, Lane Johnson, guys that won the Super Bowl, Cox, Graham, guys that won the Super Bowl, they should have been like, hey, let's just go out and take care of business. The offensive line was struggling down the stretch with those false starts and these penalties. They started with Tennessee. We talked about the Tennessee 35-10 game. There's a lot of false starts there. The Saints game, some bad calls on Lane Dickerson there. That was a really weird call on the touchdown run. But that offensive line was not in sync, and they are the leaders of the team, right? So that points to this, like, they know Kelsey and Johnson, they know how to get to a Super Bowl and win and what it takes, and how important rest is. And they were not communicating that message. Granted, it was Gardner Minshew and the Saints. I kind of blame that, but I just felt like on defensively, you got to stop the same. You can't let Andy Dalton go 14 for 14. I don't care if you're in the wrong scheme or not. Someone's got to be like, F this crap. Let's step up. Let's break up a pass here. And it wasn't until Scott did that interception. So, the thing is, the point being is like making sure this coaching staff, and hopefully they learned from the Tampa how woefully unprepared they were for that game, that they did learn from that. And hopefully, like, consultants like Vic Fangio's help. They brought some guy from the Colts over. It's not about rah-rah. It's just, it's the every down now counts. We can't adjust next week because there is no next week.
Right. No, I think, I mean, it's definitely, it's something to think about. I just don't have that big of a concern for it.
Okay.
Because, I could be inside your head and understand that, because, like you're saying, there is no next week if you lose. So, and we don't know. We only know Nick Sirianni's playoffs last year, right?
Yeah.
It's not like Andy Reid where we've had years of him and miscues and ups and downs, right? We've only had one game.
Yeah.
So this is a really important game for him as a coach, right?
Yeah.
I mean, this is a statement. I don't want to say it's a statement because it's tough, because I think the problem we're having this week is everyone's sort of downplaying it because of how it's the Giants. You know what I mean? If this was the Niners we were playing, or the Vikings or the Cowboys, I think it would be a little bit different of a sort of a narrative.
Yeah.
But I feel like it's the Giants. And that's the thing that I hope this team doesn't get caught up on. Like, talking about how, a couple of minutes ago, we were talking about that first game.
Yeah.
That's the type of thing that, like, mentally you hope that they don't walk in there and think, we're playing the Bears.
Right.
Oh, we could beat the Bears.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
That's the thing that I get concerned about. And you do have a point. Like, part of that is your coach getting up and saying, like, listen, laser focused, the details, so on and so forth. But I think collectively, you're right with Shane. I don't know how much input Nick has calling the plays, but, like, for me, like, I think offensively for me, I really didn't see many problems this year. We've always had no problem scoring all year. I felt the same way in 17. The biggest problem that we had in 17 and now this year is that you don't know what defense you're getting. You getting guys getting to the quarterback, or you getting corners that are giving up, 10 yards a clip.
Right.
You know what I mean? Or giving up 3rd and 30s, or when you need a 3rd and 3 stop, you let the guy, get the extra yard.
Yeah.
That's the things that I'm concerned about.
Yeah. I agree with you in the sense that, but I think Gannon has shown the ability to adjust. The New Orleans game is a big thing there. In the Dallas game, it was sort of the same defense. Dak went on a run, like 16 for 17. Couldn't get him off the field. They were taking what they gave us. Same thing with Washington. The way Washington beat us was pretty much a perfect game. Heineke was just taking what they gave us. They ran the ball 47 times. Didn't get a lot of yards, but taking time off the clock. The idea is to keep that Eagles offense off the field. And I think that's what the Giants will try to come out and do this weekend with Daniel Jones. And it is going to be up to see how fast, Gannon, if he has to adjust, can he do it? If the Giants are moving that ball on the first 2 series, you don't see really adjustments during a series. You see it after the series or after halftime. You know what I'm saying? Like, if the Giants went down and picked us apart, touchdown, okay, he's not going to adjust during that. He will adjust hopefully in the next series with that. Being what you said, what do you see from the Giants that concerns you coming in? The Eagles are 7.5-point favorite. Outside of the health issues that we talked about, let's say Gannon plays the right defense. Does anything on the Giants concern you coming into this game?
I mean, we haven't seen Saquon play as good as he's been playing recently. He's been, he was been banged up earlier in his career. I don't think he's panned out as the savior, the best running back that the Giants have ever had.
Right.
But now he's playing really well.
Yep.
He catch the ball out of the backfield. he looks fast. He looks quick. He doesn't look like toasted like Zeke does. You know what I mean?
Right.
He looks, and he's a powerful guy. And he's fast and he's quick. So number one, if you can bottle him up, I think that's a big thing. I think they're going to look to get to him.
Yeah.
The other thing you have to watch out for is Danny Dimes. Not only does he throw dimes, he can get out and run the ball a little bit too.
Yeah.
So don't sleep on him.
Yep.
Look out on a 3rd and 2. He might be the guy. The other thing that I don't think people talk about as much is Kayvon Thibodeau.
Yep.
I looked up a stat on him. Now this was from week 12. Week 12 on, he had 19 pressures.
Okay.
I was 8th in the league.
Okay.
But he's been playing. I remember he banged up our boy Nick Foles a little bit there.
Yeah, your boy. Yeah.
So I mean, he's a guy to watch out for. Top pick of the draft, and one of the top picks. Excuse me.
Yep.
So you gotta keep it on him. And again, do they end up flip flopping him wherever Lane is? Is he going against Lane?
Right.
Beat up on him a little bit. So I think those three things. And again, the Giants receivers played really well, but I think that's a tandem between Danny and the receivers as well. Yeah. He's been throwing the ball really well.
Yeah.
Which is really, ever since we've played him, I don't remember him being standout. But the last couple games, he's looked pretty good. So
yeah, he's definitely throwing the ball with more confidence. On the defensive side, they get back Leonard Williams, and they have the All-Pro Dexter Lawrence. That guy has been wrecking interior linemen. We're looking at Kelsey, Sayamalu, and Lane Dickerson. How much can he do? And they say, Lawrence is not a great matchup for Kelsey. It's just one of those guys, but we'll see. But they get Leonard Williams back, which is also huge, and they get their 2 cornerbacks back, which could also be a thing. But I think you're right. Going on the Eagles defensively, I watched some highlights of that 48-22 game. We were pressuring the crap out of Dan Jones. He had no time to even run the ball. There was no, when he tried to escape, someone was always there. The Giants still have offensive line problems. Their left guard has been rotated in and out all season. That just, I think, opens up the floodgates. But if, they look at the playbook of what Washington did, what Dallas did against us, keeping the ball, taking what the Eagles give us, Saquon's right there. Those receivers are coming back. And, before the podcast, walking back, Kenny Galladay kind of put a little fear in me. He has not done anything for the Giants yet. Last week he was blocking like a fiend. This could be, it's time to unleash, Detroit Lion versus Detroit Lion, Darius versus Kenny. That could be a huge issue or a huge point of strategy for the Giants coming in.
You also mentioned too, I think, Wink Martindale.
Yeah.
He really like him as a defensive coordinator.
Yeah.
And I mean, coming from, I believe, the Ravens, right?
Yep. He was poached, yeah.
I mean, you think of the Ravens defenses from 10 years ago.
Yeah.
He's the patriarch of it, right?
Yep.
So he's going to bring pressure. He's not going to sit back and, say, all right, what do you got for me? Right. He's aggressive.
Yep.
And he'll call the blitz when he wants.
Yeah, the Eagles are in 3rd and long. They're going to face these exotic blitzes. But, what a career he's had. He's a longtime game show host, and then he transitions to defensive coordinator of the NFL.
Is he really? Was he? That's a good stat.
But there was an old-time game show host in the 70s, 80s named Wink Martindale. He did I think he did Hollywood Squares, and then he did another one that I see the format of it, but I can't think of what it was.
Tic-tac-toe?
Maybe, yeah. I think tic-tac-toe. I think that's it. Yeah, Wink Martindale came back as defensive coordinator. You're right. But look, are we giving the Giants a little too much credit? They played almost a perfect game in Minnesota. There are concerns, but we have strengths too. We're the number 1 seed. Where are our strengths going to be going into this game? Let's say that Lane plays well. Jalen's playing well in terms of they're not feeling their pain. They got shot up before the game with some sort of painkillers. What do you see as our strengths?
I mean, if Jalen Hurts plays well and does what he's done all season, this team's going to win the game. Okay, I'm not saying that it's Jalen Hurts and that's it. Everybody else has to do their jobs, right? Limit penalties, limit turnovers. I think. This game, I think, is important for you want to have Jalen Hurts have a good game, and you want your running backs to have a good game.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like Boston Scott, the giant killer, like enough of that. Like he's going to get the ball. But Miles Sanders, it's one person we haven't talked about yet. He had that knee brace on the last game or whatnot.
Yeah.
That was a little like he didn't look great.
Yeah.
So you kind of wondered like what's his deal? I know he's not only what's his deal, but he kind of wants a deal, if you know what I mean, with the contract situation. So like how's he playing it?
Yeah.
And I'm not insinuating that he's, being aloof about it, but a running back that throws a knee brace on, like it affects your cutting ability. You're going to be a little bit hesitant. He's not a great pass catcher. So you just hope that like you get Gainwell in there a little bit. And I think our strength has been our offensive line and also the ability to not just run the ball, but also pass the ball. Having that yin and yang, having that what do you call it? The when you're running and passing and split. What's that called?
Yeah,
balance. Thank you. Balance. Having that balance, I think, is super important, super imperative to this. Otherwise, like you said, you get pass happy, and then you can predict what someone's doing, right? Yeah. If you start the game off and you're able to run the ball, you know that sets up a pass.
Yeah.
And then you keep them on their toes.
Yeah.
So if you're just going to go out there and sling the ball 30 times and run the ball 5, it kind of shows your hand a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. Any particular matchups that you think are good strengths for the Eagles? Either offensively versus their defense or vice versa? Kind of touched on a little bit.
I mean, I think you brought up Goddard. I think that's based on last week, I think that's very important. That's a good idea by you. Because he was hurt and then kind of came back the last couple games.
And he didn't play in that 48-22 win. So
right. So I think that'll be interesting to watch. I don't know so much about their corners, but, again, we didn't even bring up A.J. Brown, but having A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith, like this offense has a ton of weapons. Yeah. Like, if you get to a point where all you're doing is feeding, A.J. Brown and you're not getting Devontae Smith the ball, or all of a sudden you're drawing up plays for Jack Stahl and Grant Calcaterra, we're going to have problems. You know what I mean? Like, use our studs, and keep them guessing as to what they're doing.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, Goddard didn't play in the first game. New York is not very good at defending the tight end. They don't have a good defense overall. We talked about their line. That is their strength, and they're playing very well. We do have a superior offensive line. Even if we talk about the injury to Lane Johnson, the other 4 guys are healthy. They're not on the reports. I think that's going to bode well. As our offensive line plays, I think we can do that. I think the difference between us and Minnesota, you have all-world Justin Jefferson, who, by the way, Howie Roseman passed up in the draft, if you don't remember. He passed him up. But we have A.J. Brown, who came in, and then Devonta Smith. When you look at the second and third Minnesota receivers versus the second and third Eagles are by far the better if you cancel out our number 1 receivers. Devonta Smith, I'll take Quez. I think Quez will shake off the rust. And you throw Goddard in there, who's, Goddard's in the competition of C.J. Hawkins is the top 10 tight end. Dallas Goedert's top, 5, if not maybe 4 tight end in the league. That's a big upgrade in the NFL. And the Eagles' pass rush has to get to Jones to where he has no time to throw or even think about things. And that's always been the strength. We talked about this when we started doing podcasts. The offensive line, defensive line are going to predict it. And Gannon has to be able to adjust, and the team controlling the time possessions that doesn't turn the ball over. Penalties, I think, will play a factor. The Eagles still have a tendency to get some bad penalties at weird times. Don't forget, we're also getting Josh Sweat back. I don't think they would have cleared him to play if he was not ready.
That's another great point, Matt. We didn't even talk about Hassan Reddick and how well he's been playing so far this year. And you're exactly right. If you can get that edge pressure, and then you got those guys up the middle: Linval, Sue, Jordan Davis, Fletch. Brandon. I'm even forgetting Brandon Graham. And there's something also to think about with this game too. Is there are some guys that aren't going to be on this team next year.
Yeah, a lot of them.
So they kind of want to. I don't think that goes into their mind as professionals, but it's got to be in the back of their mind playing their entire career here.
Yeah.
And at any moment, that this game could be their last game. playing at
Yeah.
home.
Good point.
So,
Good point.
The Fletchers, the Brandon Grahams of the world, like
Kelsey.
I want Kelsey, like, I want nothing but the best for them, obviously, and I would never doubt their toughness, So, but what I'm trying to say is, defensive line edge. If you can get to Daniel Dimes, right, and not have him leak out,
Exactly.
running,
Don't let him run out. Yep.
kind of treat him a little bit like,
Jalen, you should treat Jalen.
I don't want to give the defense any the Giants because I know they're probably listening. So
Yeah. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. It's a good point to bring up the emotional impact for guys like Kelsey, Lane Johnson, Cox, Graham. Those guys who had long careers way before they go back to the Chip Kelly era. Those guys. I mean, that's kind of crazy to think about. And go back to Andy. Trying to think. I think Kelsey was drafted by Andy. Fletch was definitely. I think Fletch was the last number 1 pick Andy made. Johnson was the first pick of Chip Kelly, and Graham was an Andy pick as well. So I mean, they go back generations of Eagles fans, and you're right. They're gonna have a sense of pride. They do not want this being their last game at the Link. Give me a score.
27-20 Eagles.
27-20 Eagles. I like it. I have a little bit higher, but I have a 7-point difference, maybe 35-27. Maybe a 20, maybe drop it down a little bit, 30-23. That's a really, really good pick. Real quick before we end the pod, let's talk a little bit around the rest of the league, because I don't want to talk about the offseason. That's the first thing that's off limits in a podcast like this. You probably have the same superstition. But we have to look a little bit about the teams that are left. We have San Francisco and Dallas, which is another great rematch of like the 1990s playoffs, going back to Troy Aikman, Steve Young, Jeff Garcia. Yeah. We got the upstart Buffalo Bills, Cincinnati with the quarterbacks, Burrow and Josh Allen, and Mahomes versus the Dougie Peas, and Trevor Lawrence. And just to let you know, Dak Prescott is the oldest quarterback left in the playoffs at 29 years old.
Wow. Another great stat. I'm going to use these. I hope you don't mind.
Not at all. Not at all.
Number 1, I put on my list Doug Peterson. I don't want to hear anybody talk about Doug Peterson just got lucky or whatever. Doug Peterson's a damn good coach. He's a damn good football coach.
Good man, great coach, great man.
That team, other than signing Christian Kirk, having a number 1 pick in Trayvon Walker, and remember, Trayvon Walker wasn't supposed to be number 1. That was supposed to be Aiden Hutchinson, excuse me. So they make the pick for Trayvon Walker instead. He's been playing really well.
Yeah.
They haven't added much to that team. They traded the running back Robinson out of there. Yeah. Remember, middle of the season.
Yep.
Other than that, they really didn't do much.
Well, they did sign the Washington guard Sheriff, who was an All-Pro. They did sign him as right guard, so he solidified the line, much like Walker comes in. I think they went out and got Kirk. They got a few other guys, but long story short, they took a team that had no self-esteem, let alone self-confidence, coming from that asshole Urban Meyer to Doug Peterson. And and Doug Peterson coached them like the Eagles. They were 4-8. Remember those after the Super Bowl year? We struggled to get into the playoffs under Dougie P. We were 4-7, 5 and whatever, and we got into the playoffs because I think of his coaching and leadership. So yeah, absolutely, the Dougie P's are fun to watch, and they got nothing to lose. Much like Cincinnati had nothing to lose going into Kansas City last year.
Right, and again, you take that team. They were bad last year. Take out Urban Meyer, put in Doug, get those other pieces.
A few pieces.
And then to be 2 or 3 games away from a Super Bowl,
you're
like, if the guy doesn't get Coach of the Year, which I don't think he will, someone's got to at least give him like a award for something. Heck of a job, of a job. So hats off to Dougie P.
Yeah.
I love Dougie P.
Yeah.
Second thing, Brandon Staley, goodbye, you're gone. Chargers coach, out of here. Justin Herbert, you got that team, dude. You're toast. Goodbye. I don't even want him on my team if I'm a Chargers fan.
Justin Herbert.
No. Brandon Staley.
Unfortunately, he keeps his job, which I was very surprised about. As I thought if I was Sean Payton, that was the first phone call I'm making.
100%. But so I don't know how that guy's got a job between the debacle, the last game of the season where he gets Mike Williams banged up, and then what he did in the playoff game. Like he's a clown show.
And they fired the offensive coordinator and their staff. Like that was not the problem.
Yep.
That was very strange. Anyway,
and then the other big thing for playoff weekend was, I believe, the Ravens and Lamar Jackson and what happened with him. And I think that it's very interesting to me. It's going to be one of those things to watch in the offseason because I don't know if he made a business decision or not. I don't know, but he kind of cost his team a playoff win. So, I've had issues with Lamar and John Harbaugh going back to last year. And there's something that's not connected. My good buddy Dave, the New York fan, his son Rex loves the Ravens, and they brought him up to Baltimore to see a game earlier this year. I joined them for like the pregame or the day before, but something just isn't right there in Baltimore with Lamar and that team. And I agree with you. There's something off there for sure. I don't know if they don't want to give him the money or they kind of want to just tag him and trade him because I think that could also happen.
Yeah.
And to your point, like with John Harbaugh, like, I think John Harbaugh's a pretty good coach.
Yeah.
But he needs a quarterback.
The offensive coordinator left today. Greg Roman from the 49ers went to the Ravens. Now he said he's out. You wonder if that's playing into the Lamar situation or not. Or the Tom Brady situation, but we're not going to talk about the offseason just yet. Yeah, that was tough. What'd you think of the Buffalo-Miami game? Skylar Thompson was a first-string quarterback who he looked horrendous in the regular season, in my opinion, and then had that Miami team on the verge of one of the biggest upsets of all time by a third-string quarterback.
I think Miami is one of those teams to watch out for in the offseason, not to bring up the offseason, but it's going to be one of those ones that, like, if you're one of these quarterbacks, I'm going to throw names out there: Rodgers, Lamar,
Brady,
Derek Carr, Garoppolo, Brady. Like that team's a quarterback away from taking the next step.
But Tua played fairly well when he was in there. Like, he's surprisingly well.
Yeah, but I think his brain is like Jell-O now.
Most likely.
Unfortunately, I hate to say that, but I mean, he took some. I mean, and remember in college he was beat up too.
Yeah.
Hip.
Yeah.
Remember he got drafted. His hip was still banged up. Like, so he's kind of like on the cusp of that Andrew Luck stuff. You know what I mean? Like maybe it's easier just to enjoy my first round pick salary and enjoy Miami for the rest of my life. But
sounds good. I'm in.
And as far as the other, like, obviously Brock Purdy. I mean, he's been.
Let's go back to Cincinnati, Buffalo. What do you see? You got two younger quarterbacks, future stars of the league, along with Jalen, and probably Herbert. You have Mahomes and Dak kind of already established. What do you see in that Cincinnati Buffalo game? And remember, this is sort of like 3 weeks ago. You had the Damar Hamlin tragedy on the field. They didn't replay that game because it was unprecedented what happened on that field that day. But these two teams are now going to play each other. And the way Buffalo played the game against Miami, they were turnover happy. Cincinnati's got a much better, I think, a better defense, way better quarterback. However, I did hear that 3 of the 5 Cincinnati offensive linemen did not practice this week.
Well, I mean, that's an interesting little tidbit. Little tidbit there, because I mean that's very important, obviously.
Yeah.
Listen, I think Buffalo has shown from this entire season that they are Buffalo's shown that they're probably the best team in the AFC. Now you'll scoff and say, well, what about the Chiefs? I think Buffalo had a better season. I think the Chiefs are just the Chiefs. They're like the Patriots of a couple of years ago. They're always going to be in the conversation.
It's like the Eagles under Andy Reid in the 2000s. They're always in that. You're kind of tired of talking about them. Yeah.
I will say that Cincinnati, being as though they were in the Super Bowl last year, and generally teams don't do well the next season, they've sort of put that to bed a little bit as well. And I mean, Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, like that team to me, like they got a ton of weapons too. Yeah. Look at their wide receiving core. Look at their running backs. their quarterback,
Yeah.
their defense. Like they're a pretty stacked team as well. So I think you'd say out of those three teams, Chiefs, Buffalo, Cincinnati, you're looking at your AFC champion. But the fact that those two teams have to play each other, Buffalo and Cincinnati, that does nothing but help the Chiefs. And the Chiefs just have to take care of business because those two guys are going to beat up on themselves really bad.
Yeah, it's going to be a bloodbath. Yeah, you're right. You're right. And the Chiefs, Jaguars, but the Jaguars go in there with nothing to lose. Like they got nothing to lose in Kansas City.
Dougie P against Andy Reid against the disciple.
Exactly. That's some fun games there. And then of course we have the Eagles Giants. Talked ad nauseum about that. Niners Cowboys. What are you looking at there? What do you see coming out of that game?
I mean, if Brock Purdy can be Brock Purdy, he's having a heck of a sort of story.
Yeah.
I demand that next year they don't call it Mr. Irrelevant because he has shown that he's very relevant,
yes,
right?
Yes.
Their defense is really good.
Yeah.
As we know, but again, you forget Christian McCaffrey, Debo, Brandon Ayuk, so
Kittle,
yeah, exactly. Like if you can contain Brock Purdy to make him not look like Brock Purdy right now, you got to, it'll be very interesting to see how Dallas's defense affects him.
Right.
Because for all intents and purposes, Dallas's defense is really good. Right? It's really good. I mean, it's not San Francisco good, but it's
no.
Dan Quinn's getting talked about for a lot of defensive jobs. Micah looks okay. Trayvon Diggs is still good.
But this is also a defense that gave up 27 points to Gardner Minshew, and without turnovers, Gardner Minshew beats them in a game that Dallas needed, right? That Dallas and Minnesota, they remind me of the same. They have names at positions, but those names don't always perform as much as the PR hype. Cousins to Dak, Dalvin Cook to Zeke in a way. Dalvin Cook, I loved it the other day in the game. Someone said he's like either 130 miles an hour or zero impact to the game. Jefferson and CeeDee Lamb. Dallas has a little bit better obviously a much better defense than Minnesota, but then again, Minnesota wins 11 games within 1 point. Dallas, you don't know which team of those are going to show up.
Right.
For me, I think that it's been the San Francisco offense. Like they just look a little bit unstoppable right now. And I think their defense took a little bit of a hit last week in terms of they didn't look that great. Remember halftime it was 17-16 Seattle. Opening drive of the third quarter, San Francisco goes on that long drive, 8-minute drive, and kind of seals the game there. So I think that Dallas defense is going to get at it, and I think Dallas has an offensive line that can be smacked in the mouth. And I think San Francisco is going to come out and do that this week, but you never know. You never know what Dallas, Minnesota team is going to show up.
Yeah, I mean, also their tight end had a hell of a game too, Schultz.
Yeah.
He had a heck of a game.
Yeah.
And you look at it and you say you look at a team and you say okay, what guys can we take out?
Yeah.
Can we take out CeeDee Lamb and Schultz? Okay, well then you got to look for Tony Pollard and Zeke to
Gallup.
Yeah. If you're going to take out Zeke and Pollard, is Schultz going to take over? So it's all that chess game of what you're going to see. But I think it still starts. You look at Dak.
Yeah.
And he hasn't played great this year.
He was hurt, but he played great Monday.
Yeah. He was throwing the ball all over the place.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It was probably one of the best games of his career.
Yeah.
Can he do that next week? We'll see. He's been consistently inconsistent throughout his career.
Yep, exactly.
So we'll see how a fairly stat-wise good defense does to him.
Yep.
And are they playing? They're playing in San Francisco.
Yeah. San Fran was number 2 seed, so they got that. And Dallas has got to go from Dallas to Tampa to Dallas down to San Fran. They got a bit of a travel there. If that'll affect them, who knows? In the playoffs, that usually doesn't come into effect as much as you would think. But Long story short, it's going to be another phenomenal weekend. These 4 games, the final 4 of the NFL, the 2 winners move on to the NFC Championship, and an NFC East team is guaranteed to be in the NFC East, the NFC Championship this year. Only the first time since '97 that 3 teams from the same division have been in the divisional round, which is a great thing for our NFC East. That was a little bit on the downslope for a little while, and Washington wasn't that far behind. They're not that far away from being in the playoff contention either.
Matt, can you even imagine a Dallas Eagles NFC Championship game
in Philly? In
Philly, can the concrete at the link hold the rumbles, the tumbles of Dallas versus the Eagles? I mean, I hate to be a foreshadower, but I'm saying, could you imagine just the hype? Dallas week.
I can't.
Multiplied by 100.
I can't. The last time that happened, I was 5 years old, and you may not even been born yet. I mean, that's
it definitely wasn't.
And that was a different NFL back then, without the PR hype, without the NFL Network, without being able to podcast. I didn't even know what a podcast was back in 1981. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that would be insane, and I hope to be in Philadelphia if and when that happens next week. But let's get past this week. Eagles, I got the Eagles moving on. I do have the Niners moving on. I have Cincy, and I guess I go with KC, but I would not be surprised if Dougie P has that team there. Although I would not be surprised if Buffalo beats Cincy either. So, these 4 games are going to be really close. I think the Eagles game is the only one that should be, a 7 to 8 point difference. But then again, the national hype, I feel, being outside of Philly for a while, the momentum's behind the Giants.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, you just hope it swings the other way.
Yeah. All right, John, been wonderful catching up with you on your podcast. I appreciate your time.
Likewise. Thanks for having me. Always my pleasure.
I'm going to call out with the Eagles fight song as we close it out.
Touchdown, 1, 2, 3. Hit 'em low, hit 'em high, and watch our Eagles fly. Fly, Eagles, fly, on the road to victory.